Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Ajanulambita bhujau kanakavadhatau sankirtanaikapitaro kamalayatakshau Vishwambharau dvijavarau yugadharmapalau Vande jagatpriyakarau karuణावतारौ Yontah pravishya mama vachamimam prasuptam Sanjeevayatyakhila shaktidhara swadhamna अन्यांश्च हस्तचरणश्रवणत्वगादीन् प्राणान्नमो भगवते पुरुषाय तुभ्यं स्वस्त्यस्तु विश्वस्य खलः प्रसीदतां ध्यायन्तु भूतानि शिवं मिथो धिया मनश्च भद्रं भजतादधोक्षजे आवेशतां नो मतिरप्यहैतुकी Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Shri Bhakti Vijnana Swami Bhakti Vijnana Samyuktam Paramudavase Vedavakam Vijatadham Pradarshakam Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Shri Bhakti Okay, so let's begin. Chapter 8, a very important chapter and beautiful chapter. In fact, one of my very favorite chapters. So once we are here in the middle of Bhagavad Gita, right? It's like the sandwich, yes. The upper loaf and the loaf below. It's okay. It's okay. But what matters the most is the filling, and this is the filling of the Bhagavad Gita, which is so full of uh, you know real stuff. So this chapter is called as Attaining the Supreme, and we'll see why it is called so. You must have already discussed. It has just 28 verses, and so in this 28 verses, primarily what we are going to see, let me just share my screen for the whiteboard so that we have something to, yeah, I have a, maybe I can use the text instead of the board. Right. So this chapter, like I said, is Attaining the Supreme. Right. So what we are going to see are three questions primarily. What are those three questions? First is, what is this supreme? Yeah, then let's say supreme goal. That's the first one. Second, why is it the supreme goal? Right, this is the second one. And finally, we're talking about how to attain. Okay, so this is how it goes. We're basically discussing in this chapter these three important themes. Now, when you come to this bit, you come to this how to attain. Yeah, this bit of how to attain here, we are into two bits. Yeah, there are two things importantly. How to attain, and we'll discuss all of them very systematically. But to give you a picture, so like the Google map which shows you the road. Yes, so we are trying to show the path completely. We'll see, and then how to go about it. So how to attain? Krishna talks about two things. One is Yoga Mishra Bhakti. This is Yoga Mishra. I'm just writing it down here. And the other one is Shuddha Bhakti. So excuse me for all the, right. Okay. So what is the supreme goal? Why is it the supreme goal? Kind of theoretical, but we come to something very practical when Krishna begins to explain how to attain. Right? So this chapter, and we'll come back to this slide. This chapter is going to begin with Arjuna asking 7 questions. And these questions are like, these terms that Arjuna asks. He shoots, actually. He shoots these questions to Krishna in two verses, where he uses all those terms which Krishna has actually used in the seventh chapter. And what are those terms? I'm going to just read out all of them just for our ease to understand. He asks Krishna about Brahman, then he asks about Adhyatma, then Karma, Adhibhuta, Adhidaiva, Adhiyajna. And finally, which is the most important question, we'll keep it for a while. Okay, these are the six terms that Krishna is asked to clarify by Arjuna, because all these terms Arjuna has used in the Krishna has used in the seventh chapter. So Arjuna is asking, what exactly do you mean by all this? And Krishna begins to explain in the third verse onwards. Krishna begins to explain each of these terms. But the seventh question, which is the subject matter of this verse, is how to remember you, Krishna, at the time of death. Prayana Kale. Prayana Kale is, Prayana is actually a, you know, it's any kind of a journey. Yes, and this is the final journey. So Arjuna is asking, how does one remember you at the time of death? Because in the seventh chapter, Krishna has just explained Arjuna that it's important to remember me at the time of death. And Arjuna is asking this question. It is very important to him because he's on the battlefield, right? It's for him, he knows what it is because he's facing death, right? But it's relevant, equally relevant for all of us. Why? Because we're also facing death. It's just that we probably are not so aware as Arjuna was. So now all of these terms that we are talking about, Brahman, Adhyatma, we'll quickly discuss. But the seventh question is how to remember Krishna. We are going to discuss at length because that's what the chapter is all about. Now, uh, so to begin with, understanding these terms, I'm going to be very brief, but hoping that you all have done this already, but very brief in this sense. The first question, Brahman, that Arjuna asks, who is Brahman? So is it that every soul, spirit soul, can be called as Brahman? So very nicely, Prabhupada explains and Krishna explains that only that soul which is engaged in Krishna consciousness can be called as Brahman. Why? Because he knows what is to be attained, what is to be, how to understand, what is there to be understood in this entire philosophy, or understand ourselves as a spirit soul, and that person or that living entity is Brahman. Then he asks, what is Adhyatma? So Adhyatma, whether who is it? Who is the living entity? Is it the gross body, the subtle body? Who is it? This is the next question. Then karma, of course, though Arjuna has got a huge lesson already on karma, but he still asks. And then he asks Adhibhuta. So Adhibhuta, he talks about, so what, how do we understand the physical nature or the gross nature? Yeah, what is Adhibhuta? Then he asks Adhidaiva. Adhidaiva, so it means, so who is the presiding or the kind of the head of all the devatas or the transcendence, Daiva. Adhidaiva, he asks. And then finally he asks Adhiyajna, which is who is the entity who actually is the Lord of all sacrifices. So all are very technical terms. But what is this? In these entire six questions, let us understand it very simply in this way, that these six questions or terms that Arjuna is trying to clarify is about the Sambandha Jnana. No, I won't make it very complex, but we have three stages of understanding Krishna or absolute truth. It first begins with the Sambandha, which means that you begin to understand or inquire, who am I, what is my relationship with God, all that. Yes, so that is Sambandha Jnana. And then it goes to, after I know, oh, this is what it is, this is who I am, and this is who Krishna is, and this is the connection that I need to have. That is Sambandha Jnana. And then I go on to understanding the abhideya, which means that okay, this if this is the this is what I'm supposed to be doing, how am I supposed to do that? That is all abhideya, which is the subject matter of the seventh question. That is how to remember how to remember Krishna at the time of death. And then finally is the prayojana, which is the last stage where you begin to actually apply and you get the result. So in this chapter, we come to this, the seventh question by understanding that these six questions or these six terms, the philosophy is important to answer the seventh one. It's not just like that these six questions have been shot by Arjuna to Krishna. It's important to understand that these jargons or these terms, Krishna conscious terms, or in the Krishna conscious philosophy as such is important to understand how to remember Krishna. That helps us remember Krishna at the time of death. And Krishna begins to explain this in much length now. Right? He begins to explain. After explaining Arjuna quickly in verses 3 and 4, he answers all of the six questions, rather complicated and rather, kind of um, you need help to understand each of these terms. But after explaining that, he jumps to remember me at the time of death so that you can actually attain me. So this is the fifth verse. And then he says, sixth verse, that whoever does this, Arjuna, whoever is able to do that, he attains my nature without fail. Yes. So now I want to ask you, why do you think, I mean, if someone asks you in this context, why should you remember Krishna always? Because Krishna is saying here that, he uses the word um, sada. Yes, and many a times he uses these words again and again, anusmara, sada. So, in the sense, telling that always you should remember me. So, if we have to give a very simple answer, what would that be? Why should we remember Krishna always?
Death can come at any time.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. One more answer. There's one more to it.
It will be natural to remember Krishna at the time of death.
Absolutely. So these two things are the answers to this question, that why should we remember Krishna always? One is, if you remember Krishna always, then we can remember him at the time of death, and death can come anytime. Yes, it is so true. All of us have seen. We can't say we'll cross even 60. No, I'm talking about myself. So in that sense, it's important to remember Krishna all the time. Then Arjuna feels that very nice. Then if I have to remember you all the time, if that's what I'm supposed to do, why should I fight? So then we have the seventh verse. Tasmad sarveshu kaleshu mamanusmara yuddhacha. It says, no, that will not work. Yes, you will have to remember me, but you will also have to fight. And this is such a, it should be actually the kind of the motto of our lives, especially those of us who are in grihasthashram, or we are all working, we all have families, in different ways we have responsibilities. So Krishna is very clearly telling us that it's important that we, mam anusmara yuddhacha is giving us very clearly the instruction that we have to fight. Yes, we have to perform our duty, but how? All the time remembering Krishna. Now, this, you know, practice of all the time remembering Krishna. Now, Krishna is going to explain in the next few verses that, how exactly can one do this? So he explains two ways. Yes, he explains two ways. And like I said, one is he talks about the moment you talk about remembering, you kind of begin to meditate. Yes, we begin to contemplate. So remembering something means what? We begin to contemplate, we begin to meditate. So Krishna begins to explain how we can do this by the process of meditation. And then in between, while he is explaining the process of meditation, he also gives in a few uh, kind of pearls of wisdom here and there. Very interesting verses are coming here, which are going to explain the reason why we should meditate upon Krishna, his abode, his activities, how different they are from anything else which is material, including the heavenly planets, including some kind of a desire to satisfy something within this material world. These two are very different. This is what Krishna is saying. So let's. I'll just tell you a story to give a kind of a mm, set the background for this particular understanding as to how these two things, these two goals are very different. What two goals? Any goal which has to do with remembering Krishna, to achieve or attain Krishna, is very different from any other goal in this material world, be it even the heavenly planets. So this story is from Mahabharata. And this story is when the Pandavas were in the forest, and they were going through a lot of austerity. That's when Sage Vyasa, he goes to them and uh, he wants to help them. He wants to give them some kind of a motivation. So he says, "I'll tell you about Sage Dhaumya, and you will see that you can learn tolerance just by hearing about Sage Dhaumya." So Dhaumya Rishi was also one of the teachers of the Pandavas, and he used to live in the forest. And he used to follow what is called as the Kapota Vritti. What is the Kapota Vritti? Is a pigeon, living like a pigeon. What does it mean? So the way Dhaumya Rishi was living was that he would never um, make any effort in terms of earning wealth or anything. What he would do was he would be completely engaged in his spiritual practices, and for a living what he would do was he would go to the fields, and whatever was left, dropped on the floor, he would collect those grains dropped on the ground. He would collect those grains and come back and cook that. That is, kapota is a pigeon, right? So the pigeon, that's how they peck, right? So he would just peck a few grains and he would bring them back. Now, it so happened that Sage Durvasa, our hero, who's always ready to test everybody, he goes to Sage Dhaumya. He knows that Sage Dhaumya is living a very austere life. So he goes to him and he says, "Can I'm really hungry." And Sage Dhaumya is very happy to welcome him and he says, "Please come. I've just cooked some prasadam, so you can have." So Durvasa Muni comes there and ready for the meal, and Sage Dhaumya serves him. He eats up everything, whatever is there, and he asks for more. Dhaumya serves him more. And then he eats so much. Whatever is left, Durvasa is full, completely full. But whatever is left, he actually smears it on his body and makes sure that nothing is left for Sage Dhaumya. But Sage Dhaumya is smiling. And then Durvasa goes, comes back the next day, same time, and Dhaumya welcomes him again. And he would have collected those grains again, cooks again, feeds him, and Sage Durvasa repeats the same. He eats to his full and also smears everything that is left to his body and looks at Dhaumya. And Dhaumya continues to smile with a very humble disposition. Now, Durvasa Muni does this not for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, goes on for 6 days. And Sage Dhaumya has nothing to eat. He hasn't eaten for 6 days, but the sixth day also he welcomes Durvasa and he feeds him with the same smile. Now, Durvasa, after the sixth day, he says, "I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased with your tolerance." So he says, "I'm going to grant you something. I really want to send you to heavenly planets where you can enjoy so much, where you will never have a shortage of food, where, because you have fed me so much." And he goes away. And before Dhaumya could do anything, there comes a plane with these wonderful, people there who say that, "Here, this is for you, and you have to go to the heavenly planets. This is Sage Durvasa's instruction." So Dhamya has folded his hands and he says, Ruko, Ruko. Hold on. Let me, please describe what's there in the heavenly planets that you all want me to go there. So these two messengers, they begin to describe so beautifully about the heavenly planets. They said there is really nothing that is not there in that particular place. Anything that you can think of under the sun, everything is there in abundance. Uh, be it food, comfort, this, that, everything is there. So Dhamya is listening. He says, oh, there's no shortage of food at all. It's not at all. There's that, and it's food. Dhamya has not eaten for 6 days. And then he said, but there must be something. There must be something that is not so nice that may be causing, there's no anxiety at all for anybody. Says, no anxiety for any of this. No, not at all. But Dhamya again repeats, there must be something. Says, well, there is one thing. What is that? Says all these people there in the heavenly planets, they get to wear a garland, which is very, very beautiful, fresh, very beautiful garland. And they wear this garland. Each morning, they get up and they see the garland is still there. It's fresh forever. It's there, it's there. It's as though forever. And then when it's time for them to come back, suddenly they see that the garland becomes wilted, dried up, and they know it's time to go. So every morning, this is the only anxiety that they have to get up and look at the garland. And then when the garland is wilted, they know that it's time to go back. So Dhamya says, no, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go to such a place where there is this kind of an anxiety, because I know wherever there is no Krishna, there is anxiety. If I want to go anywhere, I want to go to Krishna. And at that particular point, it is said in the Mahabharata that Vishnu Dutas arrive and they take Dhamya away to Vaikuntha Loka. So this is a story which is recorded in the Mahabharata, very beautifully explaining the difference between the two. Though it's highlighting the quality of tolerance, but it is also telling us the difference between the two worlds. And for us, it is important because in this chapter, Krishna is going to explain, or rather, he's explaining that remembering me is the supreme goal, right? And why is it supreme? Because everything else is temporary, and that's why it's supreme, right? And remembering me is a supreme goal in this sense that we often use Krishna as the means to an end. Yes, all of us. What do I mean by this? Does anybody want to say? What do I mean by this statement? We often use Krishna as means to an end. Yes, Rajesh.
End goal. End goal.
And
I mean, beyond that, there is nothing. Once we achieve him,
yeah, but I said that we often use Krishna as a means to something. So what would that mean?
Or bhakti, devotion?
Okay. Anybody? Maybe I should make myself more clear. We often, generally, normally, people use Krishna as a means to something.
Fulfill the desire.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? We use Krishna as means to fulfill something, which means what? Krishna is not the goal. That is the goal, whatever that desire is. Correct? We have something as the goal, and we use Krishna as the means. But Krishna is explaining that it's not true. Yes, I am the goal. Remembering me is the goal. Everything else is not, nothing else is the goal. Nothing else can be the goal. And why? Because nothing else can give you happiness. Nothing else has the potential to give you happiness. Though we might feel that a comfortable house and a comfortable car may give us happiness, but inherently it doesn't have the capacity to do so. And what's the proof? That those things give us happiness for a few days, which means what? It doesn't have the potency to give you happiness. What has given us happiness was the peaceful mind. Yes, and that peaceful mind, we are saying, is attained when you actually keep Krishna as the goal. Only Krishna can give us that peaceful mind, right? So, understanding Krishna as a supreme goal is the first step in this, explained in this chapter. And why he is supreme is also explained in this way, that everything else is temporary. Now we come to the most important understanding, how exactly to achieve this, how exactly to remember Krishna. So, like I said, there is Yoga Mishra Bhakti that Krishna talks about, and where he's telling that there is a, to meditate upon me, sit in a certain posture and meditate upon, kind of focus yourself on this mind which is sitting in between the two eyebrows, he says. Does it ever sit between two eyebrows? Mind doesn't sit. It goes all over the place, right? But he says that focus on the mind which is sitting in between the two eyebrows, sit in Padmasan, and then breathe. And then finally, he brings in the aspect of chanting Om. Okay. Now, we know that this is one part, one way that Krishna describes. He has described earlier also in the 6th chapter, and now also he is bringing in that. Now, I've heard that not everything that Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita has to be followed. Right? How many of you all agree with that? That's a tough statement. But so, for example, Krishna in the last chapter, in the 18th chapter, says, Yathechasi tatha guru. I heard this very nice thing, that a man went to Srila Prabhupada and he said, Prabhupada, there's one verse which is really favorite, my favorite. And which is that verse? That Krishna says, do whatever you want to do. Yes, Yathechasi tatha guru. This is my favorite verse. And no one, I'm not at all surprised. I was not surprised to know that that was an Indian. No, we're very clever in this. Yes, we know how to manipulate stuff. So, Prabhupada, of course, gave a long lecture after that. But what is for us to understand is not to take verses partially. Yes, Bhagavad Gita has to be understood holistically and through the right source. So here, when Krishna is describing the process of meditation, it's not what Krishna wants us to follow, and he himself says this. When does he say this? Does anybody want to say? When does he say that? Well, it's okay. You don't have to quite follow this. There is a hint in this chapter about that. Does anybody want to say?
Tasmat Sarvesh Kalesh said.
Okay, Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu Mam Anusmara is there. Remember about me all the time. But
Yeah.
Yudhacha is there in that sense.
And he said, I think devotees don't have to bother about at what time they are going to leave. And it is for the yoga.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Correct.
verse
That's one of the
number,
verse.
if I remember, it is verse number 26,
It doesn't matter.
27,
But
Mataji.
that
27, I
doesn't,
think.
correct. That doesn't matter even, that's somewhere around there. And that's one of the right contexts when he gives us the hint that you don't have to, you don't have to worry so much about this. But there's one more verse, which is also giving us very clear understanding that, not this. Anybody?
Ananya Chetas, I think Purusha's verse number 22. Ananya Bhakti only you can
Okay.
reach to me. That is the
Okay.
verse number 22.
Okay. So let me also, I think you're right, you got the point, but it's verse number 14 where Krishna is clearly explaining that Tasyaham Sulabha Partha, says, I am easy for to obtain for somebody else who can think about me with undeviated attention and engage in my devotional service. Yes, very clearly he has differentiated the two. That one is who follows the yoga Mishra Bhakti, where he is sitting in all this. But there is another where Krishna is going to describe at length, and that is a person who's engaged in thinking of him always. And he says, whoever is able to do that will actually be able to remember me at the time of death. Now, we all know that, Ajamila was very lucky in that sense. Yes, he just at the time of death, he remembered his son Narayana. But I have heard another story which is very funny, where somebody was inspired by Ajamila and said that, okay, I will also call my younger son Narayana. And he had another son. He had this younger son Narayana, and an older son whose name was something, some Bruhu. His name was Bruhu. And this man was, he did all nonsense all his life. And then he told his friends and family that make sure that you bring this younger son in front of me when when I'm not well, I'm going to die. So that's what it is. And he thinks that he's going to fool Krishna. So then when he's about to die, his friend, he brings this younger son in front of him. And this man, with great difficulty, he shouts, "Hey, younger brother of Bruhu." Yes, he couldn't call out the name Narayana. He doesn't remember Narayana. So the point is that we can't quite cheat Krishna in this way. But the point is, when Krishna says Ananya Chintayanto, and in the 9th chapter he says that, but all of it here, Ananya Chetaha, he says with undeviated attention one has to remember me, and in that sense, for that person, I am Sulabha, I am easy to obtain. Right? Now, then Krishna is telling, like we spoke about the story of Dhaumya, he says how, after once you achieve me, Punarjanma is not going to happen at all. It's a very important verse. Mam upetya Punarjanma dukkhalayam ashashvatam naknuvanti mahatmanaha samsiddhim paramam gata. So this verse is so crucial to understand why this goal is supreme. Yeah, so when we are saying how to attain this goal, we keep on reminding ourselves. That's the only way we get encouragement to go on this path. That this goal is supreme, because this is the only goal which is going to give us an eternal kind of a result, right? And that eternal result is something which we all of us are hankering in that sense. Yeah, not to get free from miseries. No, that's one level of understanding. But the higher level of understanding is to be in proximity with Krishna, to be engaged in his service. Even not in proximity in that sense, proximity in the sense that we are always engaged in his service, in the service of his devotees. And that's possible only when we are able to remember Krishna. Now let's see, how does one remember Krishna? Yeah, how does one remember Krishna? How does one remember anything? How do we, most often we remember ourselves? Why? Because uh, by just focusing on what is our desire, we are able to remember ourselves. Give a few seconds to contemplate on this point, that we remember ourselves by focusing on what we desire, right? So why is it that we can always remember ourselves, we never forget ourselves? Because we are always thinking of what do I want? I want this, I want that. So we know it's all about me. It's all about me. So very nicely I heard this point that if we want to remember Krishna, just as if we want to remember anybody, we start thinking of what the person wants. So when we want to remember Krishna, we have to focus on what Krishna wants. And chanting is all about that, to help us discover what Krishna wants. We cry out to Krishna in this sense that please help me understand what do you want from me. So when that happens, we are able to keep Krishna's desire in the forefront. Dukkhalayam happens when we keep our desire in the forefront. Think about it. Whenever we have our desire as the primary, there is only misery. Yes, when we want something, when we are so hankering for something, it's just about me, and invariably there is frustration. But when we keep Krishna's desire in the forefront, that's when we are able to remember about him. Krishna begins to reciprocate. So it becomes like a very, very susukham kartum avyayam, Krishna says. It's a joyful process. Then it becomes a joyful process. Yes. So here in this, particular verse that we are seeing, the 15th verse, um, Krishna uses a very nice word, samsiddhim. Why does he use, siddhim is itself is like, some kind of a perfection. But what does Krishna say? He says samsiddhim, a super perfection. And he also uses the word mahatma anustumam partha. Yes, he uses that, which means what? When we are able to do this, when we are able to uh, keep Krishna's desires in the forefront, then in the eyes of Krishna, we become Mahatmas. Krishna is saying that. Krishna is saying that devotee becomes a Mahatma who has this nature. What nature? To be able to keep Krishna's desire as his or her own desire. Madhva Saint, he writes a very beautiful song, and he writes there, Ninna chittake bandu denna chittake balli, anyatha vaikeya kodiro, Srinivasa Dayanidha. He says, whatever comes to your mind, let that come to my mind. Let me not get any other desire. This is so difficult. We have so many desires. And these desires are constantly, bombarded by our surroundings, which is why we need to associate with people who have the right desires, who have the right attitude in life. So if somebody is there who is all the time talking about a career, you naturally begin to get driven by that. If there is somebody who's talking about wealth and bank balance, you naturally get driven by that. That becomes your goal. Okay? Now let's talk a little bit on this difference between the two ways that Krishna is speaking on, how to achieve Krishna. Why is this yoga Mishra Bhakti not so desirable? It's simply because anything that is complex, what does it give you? It gives you more ego. It feeds your ego. So the moment you see somebody is doing an asana like this, like that, you want to do that. This entire process of yoga is depending on oneself. These yogis, they make I heard, a very in a very lighter vein, that even the process of breathing, they make it sound so extraordinary by giving it the word pranayam. Yes, it's breathing. Who is proud of breathing? But the yogis are, and we can get, because this process of Yoga Mishra Bhakti makes us proud, whereas Shuddha Bhakti is making us completely, understand our position. We completely become helpless. And in that helpless mood, we chant Krishna's names. Because the moment we begin to chant, the bulb inside, even though it is dim, it begins to show all those ghastly desires that are there, which is not great for our spiritual life. All of that. But when you're into Yoga Mishra Bhakti, that's not happening, which is why Yoga Mishra Bhakti is not recommended by Krishna. He says, this is Sulabha. I am Sulabha in what sense? Sulabha in this sense that I am easy to achieve here, not here. Because in Yoga Mishra Bhakti, it's the process becomes complex and your ego becomes prominent. So obviously when that becomes prominent, Krishna goes in the back seat. But here we are completely putting Krishna in the front seat. We say, no, it's you, only you can drive us. So when Bhakti Vinod Thakur Bhakti Vinod, he sings in all of his bhajans, he talks about this helplessness. When Narottam, all of our bhajans, they talk about this helplessness. It says that, well, you have called yourself, Narottam Das Thakur says a very beautiful thing. He says, you call yourself Patit Pavan, isn't it? And if you are not going to help me, then what right do you have to call yourself Patit Pavan? Take that name off the list. Because you will have to do that to me then. Yes, you'll have to deliver me. So in this way, the mood of a devotee is always to accept that, this is what I am, this is how I am. very difficult. But Krishna has, Krishna Guru devotees, they have the strength to actually pull me up. And that is why for Krishna, this becomes impressive and he calls this person a Mahatma. Yogi is not a Mahatma. I mean, in this sense, a Bhakti Yogi is the one who is performing Yoga Mishra Bhakti. Krishna is not very impressed with that, right? So our will has to become what is Krishna's will. Yes, whatever uh, we are um, uh, desiring has to be in line with what actually Krishna desires. And in that sense, in that way, we are able to remember Krishna all the time. Now, after this, there is one. Does anybody have any comment or a question or a remark at this point? Okay. So I had just one important like one of you already mentioned this, that Krishna talks about different times of leaving the body as well. And here also he again distinguishes. He says it's possible that you leave at this particular point in time and then you will reach me, all that he says. But then he says, but a devotee doesn't care about all this. Why? Because he doesn't depend on himself or herself. Completely dependence on Krishna, that is what makes the path of devotional service completely different. And that path of devotional service, the benefits that he gets, we don't think of those benefits though. It's not that a devotee engages in devotional service with that, with those benefits in mind, right? Savai pumsam paro dharmo ito bhakti radhokshate ahaitu apratihata yayatma suprasidati. Ahaituki, it's completely ahaituki, which means without any motive. And it's apratihata, without any disturbance whatsoever. It's uninterrupted. So if a devotee engages in this kind of bhakti, then what happens? It's just like what a glass of water can do to quench your thirst, a well can definitely do so, right? And that is what devotional service is doing. The other parts, especially the mentioned here, is the Yoga Mishra Bhakti. It's like a glass of water. It may quench your thirst. But what devotional service does, which is summarized very nicely in the last verse, is a person who accepts this path of devotional service is not bereft of the results derived from studying the Vedas, performing sacrifices, undergoing austerities, giving charity, or pursuing philosophical and fruitive activities. Simply by performing devotional service, he attains all of these, and at the end, he reaches the supreme abode. So this conclusion of this particular chapter, verse number 28, it clearly tells us that there is no point in engaging in anything else. Krishna is declaring this, which is why for us, it's not about asana or any of these yoga mishra bhakti or mind control in that sense. But for us, it is engaging all the time, engaging our senses, our mind and intelligence in devotional service. Okay. I think I have summarized this chapter, but yeah, if you have anything that you wanted to bring it out to me, if I have missed anything, let me know.
Thank you, Mataji, for taking us through this with a lot of practical stories.
Yeah, I'll just tell you a story, this a little bit of this last bit where how we chant or how we perform our devotional service is so important, not as a ritual, but very mindfully. So there's this man who's very rich and he's very stingy. Mostly rich people are stingy also. So, so he's very stingy and uh, but he feels guilty inside. He thinks that no, I should do something. I must do some charity at least. So he thinks, okay. One day he goes to a temple. Probably it was an ISKCON temple. He goes and gives 1 lakh of rupees, and he feels done with it. Now I'm guilt free. I have done my duty. That's it. Now nobody can say anything. Now it's he dies, and these Yamadutas come and they start taking him because he's pretty sinful. And he says, "Hey, stop! How can you do that? You have not. I think there's a mistake. You can't be taking me." So they say, "No, we have got your records perfectly. Come." So then he says, "No, but actually I've given charity 1 lakh rupees, and that too to ISKCON temple." So, so then these, Yamadutas get a little, they say, maybe let's figure out what is it. So they go and ask. They tell that this man is saying that he has given 1 lakh charity to temple. So do we take him? Not, what do we do? So it seems God, this is a story in another culture. So they say, so God thinks about it just for say 10 seconds. And he says, okay, never mind, give him back his 1 lakh rupees and take him. So that's the intention with which we will, we do some things, which is what Krishna is actually looking at. Right? So that is manipulation. Yoga, the path of yoga is something like that. Okay. Thank you very much.
And that is Mataji, she simplifies complicated philosophy in simple stories, and which is where we see that she has written she has written for now 2 books for kids on Bhagavad Gita, and she has a background also, like her father has translated Srimad Bhagavatam into Kannada. Very, very educated family. Her father being a founder director of a research institute in Harvard, and she herself is highly educated. And not that she is teaching professional courses in universities, but she's also teaching, I think, so Bhagavad Gita to some professors and staff members there.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge. They keep going back to impersonalism.
Yeah. That's always there.
Yeah.
Prabhupada said that you scratch back of any Indian and you'll find that impersonalism there.
They keep saying that finally it's a consciousness. It's a state of consciousness. God is just state of consciousness. It's hard for them, to understand. Where I think Prabhupada gives very beautiful purport in the 4th chapter where he talks about Vitaraga Bhaya Krodha. He's talking about how people are afraid to accept that God has a form. So that's true. That's there. But it's a
and what to talk about people who doesn't understand the philosophy, but I've even seen in my preaching effort that some people who call themselves as Vaishnavas, they also say that finally we'll merge and finally we'll be so lack of clarity of process.
It's only because of Prabhupada that we have what we have. Otherwise, I think left to us, Guru Maharaj said this once, that left to us, we are all atheists.
Yeah.
It's only because of Prabhupada's mercy.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I just want to check if anyone has any question. Okay, if no questions, just.
You have muted yourself for some reason.
Yeah. Actually, I was receiving call from temple. So just want to check any questions for anyone. Mataji, like it is a wonderful session. The way you summarize, and it's always.
I didn't have any PPT. I'm sorry, I didn't have anything in front. So
we didn't miss that, Mataji. We didn't miss that. It was so thorough. We really appreciate. From the kirtan itself, we were completely engrossed. Thank you so much.
She, her small kids. She has 2 kids, and the way they sing and play musical instruments is awesome. Like the whole family. So yeah, we are fortunate to have her. Thank you very much, Mataji, and thanks all of you for attending. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Much Mataji. Hare Krishna.